Most people heard it, very few stopped to really understand it. A superstar rapper on camera, casually talking about something that happened when he was just a kid. At the time, it sounded uncomfortable, but easy to brush off. Years later, those same words hit different, because when you replay them with context, they don't sound like a joke. They sound like something we weren't supposed to ignore. This isn't a story built on internet rumors. It's built on public footage, documented moments, and Lil Wayne's own words. Things that played out in front of everyone yet somehow stayed unexamined. And once you line up the timeline, one question becomes impossible to avoid. Was this just a misunderstood bond, or something far darker hiding in plain sight? Lil Wayne didn't grow up with room for innocence. Early 90s New Orleans was violent, chaotic, and unforgiving, especially for kids from neighborhoods like Hollygrove. Survival came before childhood, and mistakes came with permanent consequences. Wayne's biological father was gone early, leaving a hole no kid knows how to fill. His mother did what she could, but love couldn't shield him from the streets or the pressure surrounding young talent in that city. Even as a child, Wayne stood out. His talent was obvious, and in New Orleans, talent gets noticed fast. But attention doesn't always mean protection. In a place with no safety nets, opportunity often comes wrapped in risk. And for a kid desperate for guidance, the promise of escape can feel like the only option no matter the cost. That's when Birdman entered Wayne's life, and to everyone watching, it looked like a rescue story. A successful music executive taking interest in a gifted kid from the projects felt like fate stepping in at the right time. For Wayne and his family, it didn't raise alarms, it raised hope. Wayne met Birdman around 8 or 9 years old, and by 11, he was signed to Cash Money Records. He wasn't eased into the industry, he was dropped straight into it, surrounded by adults, studios, contracts, and expectations no child should be carrying. Birdman didn't act like a distant label head. He positioned himself as a father figure, someone Wayne could rely on for guidance, protection, and belonging. Birdman publicly called Wayne his son and later claimed he adopted him, even though no official records ever surfaced. Still, that narrative became reality in the public eye. Once Wayne was seen as Birdman's child, questioning their relationship felt off-limits. Family isn't supposed to be scrutinized. Wayne fully embraced that role. He called Birdman Dad, tattooed BM Jr. on his body, and cut ties with his biological father emotionally and symbolically. Birdman wasn't just shaping his career, he was shaping his identity. But when one man controls a child's future, finances, and emotional support all at once, the balance of power disappears. What looked like mentorship on the surface began to raise quiet concerns behind the scenes. And as their bond became more public, the questions about what was happening privately only grew louder. As Wayne grew into a star, certain moments started making people uneasy. Not behind closed doors, but in public, on camera, for everyone to see. Moments that sparked confusion at first, then discomfort, and eventually serious questions. There were multiple instances over the years where Birdman kissed Wayne on the mouth during interviews, award shows, and magazine shoots. These weren't quick, blink and you miss it moments. They were broadcast, photographed, and replayed, leaving audiences visibly uncomfortable and unsure how to react. At the time, many fans brushed it off as a strange but harmless display of affection. Birdman eventually addressed the backlash, explaining that he saw Wayne as his son and kissed him out of love, especially because street life was dangerous and tomorrow wasn't promised. On the surface, that explanation sounded emotional, even relatable to some, but the repetition of these moments, especially in professional settings, kept the conversation alive. Because context matters, and when these public displays were paired with Wayne's age, their power dynamic, and what would later be revealed about his childhood, those moments stopped looking innocent. They started looking like warning signs once people saw in real time, but didn't fully confront until much later. As time went on, the discomfort wasn't coming from fans alone. People inside the industry, artists who were actually around Cash Money, started speaking up about what they said they witnessed firsthand, and their accounts made those public moments even harder to ignore. Rapper Young Buck addressed it directly in an interview, confirming that he had seen Birdman kiss Wayne on the mouth. What stood out wasn't just that it happened, but that it wasn't happening to everyone. Buck made it clear he never saw Birdman behave that way with Juvenile or other artists. According to him, it wasn't some universal way Birdman showed affection. It was specific. Other artists went further. Rapper 40 Glock claimed he personally witnessed kisses that went beyond anything that could be considered fatherly, describing behavior that crossed obvious boundaries. His statements circulated widely, adding fuel to conversations people had already been afraid to have out loud. Even artists connected to the Hot Boys later admitted the behavior felt strange at the time. Multiple voices, from different angles, all pointing to the same uncomfortable pattern. And once that pattern became visible, it raised a serious question. If this was happening openly, what was happening when cameras weren't around? The conversation changed completely when Wayne himself told a story that fans couldn't explain away. Not a rumor, not secondhand claims. His own words, on camera, in a documentary meant to show his rise, not his trauma. In the Carter documentary, Wayne sat with a young Lil Twist and casually described something that happened when he was just 11 years old. He talked about being scared, he mentioned adults in the room, and he referenced Birdman and others being present. The way he told it was almost offhand, like he was recalling a normal memory instead of something deeply disturbing. That moment shocked viewers then, but many didn't fully grasp what they were hearing. Wayne framed it as something that was confusing, scary, and somehow cool at the same time. That contradiction alone raised red flags. Kids don't process harmful experiences the way adults do, especially when those moments are normalized by the people around them. What made it even more unsettling was who he was telling the story to. Another young artist. Another kid under his influence. To some viewers, it sounded less like a joke and more like a glimpse into a cycle that had been passed down and never questioned. Wayne never labeled the incident as abuse. But trauma doesn't always announce itself clearly. Sometimes it shows up disguised as laughter, minimization, or silence. And once people revisited that footage years later, it became impossible to unsee what might have really been happening in that kitchen. What happened after that is where the timeline gets impossible to ignore. Just 1 year later, at the age of 12, Wayne attempted to off himself with a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Years later, he would openly connect that moment to deep trauma and PTSD, finally giving context to something fans had wondered about for decades. Kids don't make decisions like that in a vacuum, especially not kids who are being praised, promoted, and positioned for stardom. Something was clearly wrong beneath the surface. Wayne survived, but whatever he was carrying didn't disappear. It followed him into adulthood. Not long after, Wayne began using substances at a very young age, something he's admitted publicly. What started as experimentation quickly became dependency. Observers and mental health experts alike have pointed out that self-medication is a common escape route for people dealing with unprocessed childhood trauma. When you can't shut your mind off, you try to numb it. Wayne's struggles with addiction, seizures, and repeated hospitalizations would later become public knowledge, often treated as celebrity headlines instead of warning signs. But when you look back at the sequenced childhood fear, a self-harm attempt, and years of chemical escape, it starts to look less like chaos and more like a pattern, one shaped by pain that was never properly addressed, only buried. For years, whatever happened in Wayne's childhood stayed buried beneath loyalty and success. But when the money came into question, the silence finally broke. And what surfaced wasn't just a business dispute. It was a power struggle that exposed how deep the control really went. In 2014, Wayne shocked fans by calling himself a prisoner of Cash Money Records. His album, The Carterverse, was finished, but he wasn't allowed to release it. The label he helped build was now blocking his own work. Publicly, the father-son image began to crack. By 2015, Wayne filed a massive lawsuit, accusing Cash Money and Birdman of withholding tens of millions of dollars and cutting him out of profits tied to Young Money, the label Wayne founded. This wasn't just about delayed payments. The lawsuit alleged a system where Wayne generated enormous wealth but had little transparency or control over where the money went. What made this hit harder was the pattern. Other Cash Money artists Juvenile, Manny Fresh, BG, and Turk had already left the label over similar claims of unpaid royalties. Wayne wasn't an exception, he was the biggest example. As the legal battle played out publicly, Wayne stopped using family language altogether. He spoke about being manipulated, trapped, and mistreated. And once the business relationship collapsed, it forced people to look back and question everything else that came before it. Because control over money often mirrors control over people, and in Wayne's case, that control started long before contracts were ever signed. In 2018, the war appeared to end. Wayne and Cash Money reached a settlement behind closed doors. The exact numbers were never fully revealed, But Wayne was finally freed from his contract, regained control of his music, and released The Carter V, an album many saw as a victory after years of delay and conflict. Not long after, Wayne and Birdman reunited publicly. They shared stages, exchanged kind words, and presented a picture of peace. To some fans, it felt like closure, proof that whatever happened had been resolved. But reconciliation doesn't mean erasure. A handshake doesn't undo a childhood. Public forgiveness doesn't rewrite private experiences. Wayne himself had already shifted his language, making it clear that Birdman wasn't family in the way he once believed. That alone spoke volumes. What makes this story resurface again and again is that the documentation still exists. The interviews, the footage, the timelines, none of it disappears just because the conflict cooled down. And as the industry continues to confront its past, Wayne's story forces an uncomfortable truth into the open. Sometimes survival is mistaken for success, and sometimes making peace doesn't mean the damage was ever undone. Lil Wayne's story forces a hard question most fans never want to ask. Not whether he succeeded, but what it cost him to survive. Because becoming a legend doesn't erase what happened before the fame. It doesn't cancel out fear, trauma, or the things a child never should have been exposed to. Wayne endured what many wouldn't have. He turned pain into art, influence, and one of the greatest careers hip-hop has ever seen. But survival shouldn't be the bar we celebrate. Protection should be. No child should have to trade their innocence for opportunity, no matter how talented they are or how desperate the situation feels. What makes this story uncomfortable is that much of it wasn't hidden. It happened publicly, on camera, in interviews, in documentaries. We saw it, we just didn't want to fully understand it. And Wayne wasn't the only young artist in that environment. He was just the one who lived long enough and spoke loud enough for the pattern to become impossible to ignore. As the industry continues to reckon with its past, stories like this aren't about tearing legends down. They're about learning what needs to change. Because if we keep celebrating survival instead of demanding protection, the cycle doesn't end. The names change, the labels change, but the damage stays the same. Sometimes the people who claim to love you hurt you the deepest. Sometimes opportunity comes with a price no child should ever pay. And sometimes the most important thing we can do is tell the full story, even when it makes us uncomfortable.